In a world fractured by time, belief, and battle, there exists one city that stands as the sacred heartbeat of three of the world's most powerful faiths. A city where the whispers of prophets echo through ancient stones, where the blood of kings, conquerors, and saints stains the soil, and where heaven and earth seem to meet under a sun that has seen more war, worship, and wonder than any other place on earth. This is not just a city, it is a divine battleground, a celestial enigma, a living scripture carved in stone and flame. This is Jerusalem, and whether you are Christian, Muslim, Jewish, or simply a seeker of truth, what you are about to discover will shake the very foundation of your understanding. Because Jerusalem is not just history, it is destiny. Welcome to the most spiritually contested, religiously revered, and politically explosive city in human history. For nearly 5,000 years, Jerusalem has drawn the eyes of kings and the prayers of the faithful. Its stones have been kissed by prophets, its soil soaked in divine blood, and its walls have crumbled and risen with the shifting tides of empires and faiths. From the sacred wellsprings of Genesis to the fiery end times of Revelation, Jerusalem is the one city that lives not only in our histories, but in our holy books, in our prayers, in our very souls. But how did it all begin? How did a barren hilltop in the Judean wilderness become the spiritual capital of billions? Why did this city, no larger than a modest town, become the epicenter of the eternal struggle between God and man, belief and power, heaven and earth? The answers may surprise you, because this is no ordinary story. This is the ultimate divine drama. In this video, we take you on a breathtaking, soul-stirring journey through time, faith, and fire. From its obscure origins near a hidden spring where wandering tribes first built crude walls, to the rise of David and Solomon and the glory of the first temple, where the Ark of the Covenant may have once rested, we uncover how Jerusalem became the dwelling place of God. Then came destruction, exile, the Babylonian conquest, and the tears of a scattered people yearning for Zion. And yet, Jerusalem endured, reborn under Persian tolerance, only to fall again to the thunder of Alexander the Great and the seductive pull of Hellenism. But the story was far from over. Under Roman boots, a new faith was born, one that would change the world forever. Here, in these streets, a carpenter's son would carry his cross, die, and, his followers believe, rise again. Christianity was born in the shadow of Jerusalem's walls, and the world would never be the same. But neither would Jerusalem. The temples were razed, the Jews expelled. A pagan city rose where the temple had once stood, and then another miracle. From the deserts of Arabia came the final prophet, and with him, Islam. The city that once turned its face to the temple now turned toward Mecca, but not before cherishing Jerusalem as the site of the Prophet Muhammad's miraculous night journey. Under Islamic rule, Jerusalem flourished once more, until the sword of the Crusader brought fire and fury. Massacre. Redemption, holy war. Then came Saladin the Wise. The Mongols, the Mamluks, Ottomans, and Empire, and through it all, Jerusalem never died. It has changed hands more than 40 times. It has been claimed, blessed, cursed, and coveted. It has seen temples, churches, and mosques rise in glory and fall in ashes. And yet, she stands, eternal, awaiting the final chapter. Because, make no mistake, Jerusalem is not done yet. Today, in the 21st century, the city remains at the heart of the world's most volatile conflict, the symbol of unfulfilled promises, unanswered prayers, and a hope that refuses to die. For some, it is the future capital of a messianic kingdom. For others, it is the site of the end of days. And for all, it is holy. So click play. Let your spirit be stirred, your mind be opened, and your heart be drawn into the greatest story ever told, not in myth, not in metaphor, but in real, tangible, sacred stone. This is not just history. This is prophecy unfolding. This is the entire history of Jerusalem, and it will leave you breathless. In the beginning of the ancient days, long before the prophets walked the earth and long before kings wore crowns of gold and ruled over vast dominions, there was a land, dry, rugged, and forgotten by many, a land nestled among the hills, kissed by sun and wind, surrounded by silence except for the whisper of the breeze and the murmuring of a hidden spring. This spring, known to us now as the Gihon Spring, bubbled up from the depths of the earth like a sacred gift, clear and pure, and it was this humble spring that would give birth to one of the most sacred, contested, and storied places in all of human history, Jerusalem. Around 3,000 years before the birth of Christ, long before the name Jerusalem was known to the world, the ancestors of the ancient Canaanites came upon this spot and saw not just water, but life, opportunity, and destiny. They settled beside the spring, shaping the dry land with their hands, turning wilderness into home, building shelters, gathering food, and slowly crafting the outlines of what would one day become a holy city. The presence of water in such a place was not a coincidence. It was a divine whisper, a signal from the heavens that this land was not like others. It had purpose. It had calling, and in time, it would have a name. By 2000 BCE, ancient Egyptian scribes recorded the name Jerusalem in their meticulous documents, speaking of a city nestled in the hills of the land they called Canaan. This was the first time in human record that Jerusalem was named, though already its soul had begun to take shape, hidden behind stone walls erected to protect the sacred spring that gave life to its people. These Canaanites, early guardians of the city, understood the value of what they held and surrounded the waters with defense, for they knew that where there is water, there will be thirst, and where there is blessing, there will be envy. By 1500 BCE, Jerusalem had grown in strategic importance and found itself under the mighty shadow of the Egyptian Empire, a vassal to the pharaohs of the new kingdom. Egyptian soldiers and governors may have claimed authority, but the spirit of the city remained its own, guarded not only by men but by something deeper, something ancient and unseen, something that would not be silenced by time or conquest. And then, in the centuries to follow, as the world changed and new peoples emerged, a shepherd boy from Bethlehem rose by divine appointment, a boy who played the harp and fought giants, a boy named David. Guided by divine vision and chosen by a voice not of this world, David ascended to power and brought with him the hopes of a united people. Around 1000 BCE, he took Jerusalem, not through sheer military force alone, but with the conviction that this city was to be the dwelling place of the Most High. He established Jerusalem as the capital of a new kingdom, Israel, and brought the Ark of the Covenant into its gates, not as a trophy of war, but as a declaration of holiness. In doing so, he transformed Jerusalem from a mere stronghold into a sanctuary, from a city of men into a city of God. The echo of his song can still be felt in the stones. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." David's legacy was not simply political, it was spiritual, and it would be carried forward by his son, Solomon, a king whose wisdom was sought by queens and whose heart was drawn toward the divine. Solomon, son of David, built the first temple, a place not only of worship but of wonder. Crafted from gold and cedar, adorned with precious stones and intricate carvings, the temple was the heart of Israel's spiritual life. It stood as a connection between heaven and earth, a sacred house where the presence of God was said to dwell. Pilgrims came, offerings were made, prayers were lifted, and Jerusalem pulsed with divine energy. The city had become not just a capital, but a symbol of a covenant, a beacon for a chosen people. Yet even in the light of glory, shadows began to fall. After Solomon's death, around 922 BCE, the unity of Israel fractured. The kingdom split into two. The northern kingdom retained the name Israel, while the southern kingdom took the name Judah, with Jerusalem as its capital. This division weakened the people, and with weakness came vulnerability. Assyrian eyes looked down from the north, Egyptian ambitions stirred in the south, and Jerusalem, once the symbol of strength, found itself caught in the shifting tides of power. Time and again, foreign armies tested the city's defenses, and though it withstood many storms, the faith of its people wavered. Prophets rose, men like Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel, warning of judgment, calling for repentance, begging the nation to return to the path of righteousness. But their cries were often ignored, their visions dismissed. And then came Babylon, the great empire from the east, led by King Nebuchadnezzar II, marched upon Jerusalem with fire in their hearts and steel in their hands. In 587 BCE, they breached the walls. The temple, the very dwelling place of God, was desecrated and destroyed. Its gold was stripped, its stones thrown down, its priests slaughtered, and its people taken in chains. The ark, once the symbol of God's covenant, vanished into mystery. Jerusalem burned. The smoke that rose from the city carried with it not just the scent of ruin, but the cries of a people broken, the silence of a covenant shattered. The exile to Babylon was not merely physical, it was spiritual. The songs of Zion became laments. How can we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land? They wept. The identity of a nation, once centered in a temple and a city, had been scattered to the winds. But even in the depths of despair, the story was not over. In 538 BCE, the wheel of history turned once more. The Persian Empire, led by Cyrus the Great, conquered Babylon. And in a moment that history might call surprising, but which faith calls divine, Cyrus allowed the Jewish people to return to their land. He issued a decree of restoration, and the exiles, weary from decades in a foreign land, journeyed home with hope flickering in their hearts. They did not find the Jerusalem they remembered. The walls were broken. The temple was gone. The once mighty city was reduced to rubble and memory. But they began again. Stone by stone, prayer by prayer, they rebuilt the altar, laid the foundation of a new temple, and rekindled the fire of faith. Though smaller than Solomon's, the Second Temple represented more than architecture. It represented resurrection. A people once exiled had returned. A covenant once threatened had endured, and Jerusalem, though scarred, had survived. This part of the story always moves me. Not because it ends in triumph, but because it reveals the endurance of the soul. Jerusalem was not chosen for its size or wealth. It was chosen because in its rises and falls, in its joy and suffering, we see the story of humanity. We see ourselves. There are times when we are David, full of hope, vision, and divine purpose. There are times when we are Solomon, blessed with glory, yet vulnerable to pride. There are times when we are the exiles, mourning what was lost, unsure of what lies ahead. But always, there is the invitation to return, to rebuild, to believe again. Jerusalem is more than a city. It is a testament. It has been crushed, yet never destroyed. It has been hated, yet never forgotten. It has been claimed by many, yet belongs fully to none but the divine. Its stones have seen kings rise and empires fall. Its soil has soaked up the tears of prophets, the blood of martyrs, and the prayers of generations. And through it all, it remains, standing not by the power of men, but by the will of something higher. When I close my eyes and picture ancient Jerusalem, I don't just see walls and temples. I hear the shofar calling people to prayer. I see a child chasing a lamb through narrow streets. I see a scribe writing sacred words on parchment. I see mothers lighting candles and soldiers guarding gates. I feel the weight of history and the breath of eternity. And I know that the story of Jerusalem is far from over. It continues to unfold, written not only in books but in hearts, not only in stone, but in spirit. In the days of old, in a time when empires stretched like shadows across the earth and kings carved their names into the bones of nations, there was a land chosen, a city set upon a hill, a place where heaven kissed the dust of the earth, Jerusalem. Long before the echo of modern conflict or the hustle of pilgrims' footsteps, this city stood at the crossroads of eternity and mortality, the meeting place of God and man. And in the year 332 before the birth of the Christ, a mighty wind came sweeping from the west. His name was Alexander, called the Great by men, but merely a tool in the hand of the Almighty. With his sword gleaming and his eyes set on conquest, Alexander the Macedonian warrior took Jerusalem, and the ancient city that once bowed only to the God of Abraham now bent under the heel of the Hellenistic world. And thus began the age of Hellenization, when Greek culture, language, philosophy, and pagan customs crept into the fabric of Jewish life like ivy twisting through old stone. The city still stood, the temple still shone with gold and incense, but something beneath the surface began to shift. The Greek way of life, rational thought, polytheism, glorification of the body and public spectacle, enticed many. The youth, curious and drawn to the allure of the wider world, began to forsake the old paths. The Torah was still read in synagogues, but Greek was spoken in the streets. The traditions of Moses were kept, but the spirit began to weaken. Some priests compromised, others resisted, and the faithful began to feel like strangers in their own land. And so, as it has always been when God's people forget who they are, a time of testing came. The Seleucid Empire, inheritors of a slice of Alexander's domain, grew bold in their oppression. Antiochus IV, Epiphanes, that blasphemous king, dared to desecrate the temple itself, erecting an altar to Zeus upon the altar of God and sacrificing swine in the holy place. The people wept, the righteous mourned, and the blood of the covenant cried out from the ground. But God was not silent. From the hills of Modian, a priest named Mattathias and his sons lit a spark of revolt. One son in particular, Judas Maccabeus, whose name would be etched into the pages of resistance, took up the sword not for ambition, but for faith. He gathered the faithful, the brave, the desperate, and struck back against the might of the Seleucids. Battle after battle, victory after victory, until at last, in a divine reversal, the invaders were pushed out, the temple reclaimed, and the holy flame rekindled. For 8 days the light burned, a miracle in the darkness, and the people rejoiced. This was the birth of the Hasmonean kingdom, a time of independence, when the people of God ruled themselves again, not through imperial decree, but by the strength of their own hand. Yet even then, as the prophets often warned, power brings temptation, and peace often gives way to pride. The Hasmonean rulers, descended from priests and not kings, began to blur the lines between sacred duty and political ambition. Factions arose, some loyal to the traditions of the elders, others drawn to the pragmatism of alliance with Rome. And in that fragile space between faith and politics, a new ruler emerged. His name was Herod, called the Great, though history remembers him more for his paranoia than his grandeur. In 37 before the Christ, he seized Jerusalem with Roman backing, establishing himself as king under the watchful eye of the empire. He was not of David's line, but he sought to legitimize his rule with monumental building projects. The temple, though once defiled, was now gloriously expanded under his reign. Its courtyards teemed with worshippers, its white stones gleamed in the sun, and its walls stood tall like the hopes of a weary people. But beneath the surface, fear ruled. Herod's hands were stained with blood, of his wives, his sons, and countless innocents. He was the same Herod who, upon hearing of a child born king of the Jews, ordered the massacre of Bethlehem's babies, a crime so vile that even Roman historians recoiled. When he died, Rome took direct control of Jerusalem in the year 6 after the Christ was born, and from that moment, the iron boot of Caesar pressed harder upon the neck of the people. Taxes grew, soldiers patrolled the streets, and hope began to dim. Yet in the fullness of time, in a stable far from the palaces of kings, the Son of God was born. And in that same Jerusalem, not many years later, he would walk, teaching, healing, weeping. He cleansed the temple that Herod had rebuilt, wept over the city that had killed the prophets, and foretold its destruction. He was arrested in the garden, tried in the halls of men, and crucified outside the city walls. And on the third day, he rose again, defeating death not by might or sword, but by love and sacrifice. His followers, simple men and women filled with the Holy Spirit, began to spread the good news, not just in Jerusalem, but to the ends of the earth. But the powers of the world did not rejoice. The early church, though full of joy, found itself hunted by the Sanhedrin, by the Romans, by the devil himself. And amid this storm, Jerusalem still stood, wounded, tense, boiling beneath the surface. In 66 after Christ, the people rose again. It was the first Jewish revolt, a cry for freedom and dignity, a final push to throw off the chains of Rome. For 4 brutal years, the war raged. Zealots held the city, Romans encamped outside. Blood flowed in the streets, brother turned on brother, and the sacred vessels of the temple were hidden or destroyed. Then came the year 70. Titus, the Roman general, future emperor, breached the city walls. The temple burned. The sanctuary, the very heart of the Jewish faith, became ash and ruin. Jesus had prophesied it. Not one stone will be left on another. And so it was. The only remnant was a wall, where even today people pray and weep. But the tragedy did not end there. In 135, another revolt flared, the Bar Kokhba rebellion. This time, Rome resolved to erase Jerusalem entirely. Hadrian, the emperor, crushed the revolt and expelled the Jews. He renamed the city Aelia Capitolina, built a temple to Jupiter upon the ruins of God's house, and forbade any Jew from setting foot inside the city under pain of death. The holy city had become a pagan colony, and the people of the covenant were scattered to the ends of the earth. Yet even in exile they remembered. Even in foreign lands they prayed, next year in Jerusalem. And the Christians too carried with them the memory of that place, not just as a location, but as a symbol. For in Jerusalem heaven had touched earth. The Lamb had been slain, the veil had been torn, and the promise of a new heaven and a new earth had been spoken. And I tell you now in my own reflection that this story is not merely a tale of ancient days. It is a mirror held up to our souls. For just as Jerusalem stood at the crossroads of empire and eternity, so too do we. We are caught between the kingdoms of this world and the kingdom of God. We too are drawn to compromise, tempted by comfort, threatened by power. And yet the promise remains, that though the city may fall, the word remains. Though the temple may burn, the Spirit lives on. Though the nations rage, the King is coming. And one day, as it is written, the New Jerusalem will descend, a city not built with hands, shining with the glory of God, and he will wipe away every tear, and death shall be no more. Until that day, the story of Jerusalem continues, not just in stone, not just in books, but in us. We are the living temple. We are the city on a hill. We carry within us the echoes of Zion, the memory of the fire, and the hope of the resurrection. In the ancient days when empires rose and fell like the ebb and flow of the tide, and kings and prophets walked the earth under the gaze of the Almighty, there stood a city unlike any other, a city not built merely by stone, but by sacred promises, prophetic visions, and the tears of saints. Jerusalem, the heart of the world, the city chosen and called holy, witnessed the unfolding of divine destiny again and again, across ages and rulers and wars and prayers. In the 4th century after the birth of Christ, a new dawn broke across the Roman Empire. It was a time of transition, of revelation, and of divine intervention. The Emperor Constantine, a man once bound by pagan beliefs, beheld a vision, a cross of light in the heavens, with the words, "In this sign, conquer." Moved by what he saw, he embraced the Christian faith, and the course of history changed forever. Under Constantine, the persecution of Christians ceased, and the once despised faith of the crucified Redeemer became the religion of emperors. In the land where the Lord had walked, bled, and risen, Constantine built a monument, a church so holy that even the angels would have whispered as they hovered near. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre rose above the site believed to be the burial and resurrection place of Christ. Pilgrims, monks, and visionaries from across the known world traveled through deserts and mountains to kneel before the empty tomb. Jerusalem, now under the watchful rule of the Byzantine Empire, bloomed as a spiritual capital, a symbol of Christian glory and divine heritage. The city pulsed with hymns and incense, its streets alive with chants echoing the victory of life over death. For nearly 3 centuries, this holy flame burned bright, unchallenged, and revered. But the divine script was far from finished. In the vast deserts of Arabia, a new prophet emerged, Muhammad, who claimed to receive revelations from the same God who spoke to Abraham and Moses. His followers, burning with zeal and certainty, swept across the sands like a storm. Within a few short decades, the Islamic Caliphate rose with incredible force, and in the year 638, the Caliph Umar arrived at the gates of Jerusalem. The city, weary from centuries of strife, and now exposed to this rising power, opened its gates. But Umar did not come with wrath. Clad in humility, he entered not as a conqueror, but as a servant of divine will. He was offered to pray within the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, but refused, fearing that his actions would one day lead to its conversion into a mosque. Instead, he prayed outside, establishing a precedent of respect and restraint. Under his rule, Jews, long expelled under Byzantine Christian authority, were allowed back into the city. Christians and Jews alike were granted freedom to worship under the Dhimma, a pact of protection. Thus, Jerusalem became a shared sacred space, watched over by Muslim rulers who, at least in that season, honored the sanctity of all Abrahamic traditions. Then came the era of monumental construction. The Dome of the Rock was built atop the Temple Mount, its golden dome catching the first light of dawn, dazzling travelers for miles. Beside it rose the Al-Aqsa Mosque, becoming the 3rd holiest site in Islam. For Muslims, it was believed that the Prophet Muhammad ascended into the heavens from this very spot during the miraculous night journey. With these structures, Jerusalem was not only a relic of the Christian past or the Jewish memory, but now also a living cornerstone of Islamic faith. And yet, the winds of history never cease their turning. In 1969, the Fatimid Caliphate seized Jerusalem. At first, they ruled as others had, balancing control with coexistence. But time revealed a darker turn. Slowly, the grip on religious freedom began to tighten. And then, like a bolt of lightning splitting the heavens, tragedy struck in 1009. Caliph al-Hakim, known for his erratic behavior and harsh edicts, ordered the destruction of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Stones that once rang with praise fell into silence and dust. The news crossed seas and mountains, reaching the ears of Western Christendom. Horror turned into rage, and rage into a vow that the holy places would not remain in ruin, and that pilgrims would no longer travel in fear. A holy war was being written into the hearts of kings and knights. By 1073, the Seljuk Turks, fierce and militant, took control of the city. Unlike the Arabs before them, the Seljuks viewed the Christian pilgrims not as guests, but as invaders. Tales spread across Europe of pilgrims beaten, robbed, or turned away from the sacred city. It was in this time of turmoil that Pope Urban II, in 1095, raised his voice to the heavens and to the people, calling upon the warriors of Christendom to take back what had been defiled. From every village and kingdom they came. Lords and peasants, driven by a mix of faith, greed, and adventure, took up the cross and marched east. In 1099, the First Crusade reached Jerusalem. They circled the city like a lion surrounds its prey. After a brutal siege, the Crusaders broke through. What followed was one of the bloodiest days in the city's long history. Christian swords did not distinguish between soldier or civilian, man or child. The city of peace was drowned in war and flame. But to the Crusaders, it was not conquest, it was redemption. They knelt on blood-soaked ground and wept at the tomb of Christ, now free once more as they believed, from the hands of unbelievers. The Kingdom of Jerusalem was established, a Latin Christian stronghold in the heart of the Holy Land. Churches were rebuilt, monasteries flourished. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre rose again, its bells tolling across the hills. Yet this kingdom, though anointed with holy oil, was born of violence and would not last in peace. For beyond the mountains and deserts, a new force was rising. Saladin, a man of discipline, strategy, and deep faith. By 1187, he had united the Muslim world under his banner. At the Battle of Hattin, he crushed the Crusader army, and soon after, he approached Jerusalem. But unlike the bloodshed of 1099, Saladin offered mercy. He allowed the Christians to leave, to carry what they could, and he opened the city once more to pilgrims, albeit under Muslim governance. The churches remained, though many relics were taken into Muslim hands. Still, in his justice, many saw the hand of God. The Crusades continued for another century, each attempt weaker than the last. The West, torn by internal strife and distracted by new ambitions, could no longer mount a force mighty enough to retake Jerusalem. And in 1291, the final blow was struck. The Mamluks, warrior slaves who had risen to power in Egypt, completed the task. The last Crusader stronghold fell, and with it, the Christian dream of a permanent kingdom in the East died. But Jerusalem lived on, not merely as a city, but as a symbol, an aching wound and a glorious promise. For Christians, it remained the place where Christ had conquered death, where the church had first blossomed. For Muslims, it was the city of the night journey, the echo of divine connection. For Jews, it was the memory of the temple, the yearning for return. Across every stone, every shadowed alley and sunlit dome, lingered the prayers of centuries. And though empires had claimed her, none could hold her forever. Perhaps it was by design. Perhaps Jerusalem, in her sacred mystery, was never meant to belong to any one people, but only to the will of God. As it is said in the Scriptures, "The Lord has chosen Zion, he has desired it for his dwelling." And so the city waits. Through centuries of silence and song, of blood and blessing, she waits. Her stones remember the footsteps of prophets and kings. Her winds carry the echoes of psalms and prayers, of muezzins and monks. She is the city where heaven touched earth, where man met the divine. And still, she waits, not for another empire, but for peace, true peace. The peace not born of treaties or armies, but the peace that surpasses all understanding. Until that day, Jerusalem remains the mirror of our longing, the heart of our hope, and the crown of the earth. In the year 1516, under the will of destiny and the designs of the Almighty, the holy city of Jerusalem passed into the hands of the mighty Ottoman Empire, a realm whose banners fluttered with the crescent moon and whose power stretched across vast lands, from the deserts of Arabia to the gates of Vienna. It was not with fire and destruction that they entered, but with the measured tread of authority, taking the city from the fading grip of the Mamluk rulers. This moment marked the beginning of a new chapter in Jerusalem's long and sacred history, a chapter filled with moments of peace and struggle, devotion and despair, decline and rebirth, all woven together in the tapestry of God's providence. And in the early days of Ottoman rule, a man rose above all others, a sultan of vision and ambition, one whom the people would come to know as Suleiman the Magnificent. Under his watchful eye, the city of Jerusalem was not left to crumble, nor was it reshaped into something unrecognizable, but rather it was preserved, nurtured, and in some ways reborn. He ordered the reconstruction of the ancient walls of the city, walls that had once borne witness to kings and prophets, to messiahs and martyrs. These very stones that Suleiman laid his command upon still stand today, encircling the old city like the arms of a shepherd around his flock. Their presence is not merely architectural, but spiritual, for within those boundaries lies the heart of three great faiths, beating in rhythm with the eternal mystery that is Jerusalem. It was during this time that the city entered a rare period of religious coexistence. The Muslim, the Jew, and the Christian each found a place for worship, for prayer, for remembrance. Mosques echoed with the call to prayer, churches with the ringing of bells, and synagogues with the murmur of psalms. It was not a perfect peace, but it was a peace, and in a city so often torn by zeal and sword, that alone was a miracle. Yet peace, like morning dew, is fleeting in Jerusalem, and though the city did not fall to enemy blades, it began to fall to something quieter, more insidious: neglect, economic hardship, and the long shadow of imperial indifference. As the years passed, and the Ottoman Empire grew preoccupied with the burdens of governance elsewhere, Jerusalem began to fade in prominence. The roads became worn, the markets sparse, and the vitality of the city dimmed like an oil lamp burning low. By the 18th century, the once radiant city of God had become something of a forgotten relic, a holy site visited by the pious, but ignored by the powerful. Her gates were walked through by the faithful, but her cries were heard by few. Her glory was remembered, not lived. Her grandeur was recited in scripture and prayer, not seen in stone and spirit. Her economy slowed to a crawl, her people dwindled, and by the beginning of the 19th century, Jerusalem's population had withered to around 8,000 souls. These were divided among the ancient quarters: Jewish, Muslim, Christian, and Armenian, each community holding fast to their traditions, preserving their sacred spaces with the tenacity of those who know they are safeguarding not just history, but the divine. The Jewish quarter, small yet resolute, clung to the western wall, the last remnant of the ancient temple. The Muslims guarded the Haram al-Sharif, with Al-Aqsa and the Dome of the Rock gleaming under the sun like divine beacons. The Christians preserved the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the very site of Calvary and the resurrection. The Armenians, a people long tested by exile and endurance, kept their cathedral and their customs alive in a corner of the city that had become their refuge. And though the city seemed silent, beneath the surface, something stirred. It was as though the spirit of Jerusalem, long dormant, was beginning to awaken. For in the 19th century, like a trumpet sounding in the distance, the attention of Europe returned to Jerusalem. The Christian nations of the West, drawn by faith, politics, and curiosity, began to send their emissaries, their missionaries, their builders. Consulates were established, Churches were constructed, and schools were opened. France, Russia, Britain, and others came, each seeking a foothold in the Holy Land, each bringing with them not only power and money, but an idea that Jerusalem still mattered. And as Europe looked east, a new movement was taking shape in the hearts of Jews across the continent. In the cold villages of Russia, in the ghettos of Poland, in the narrow streets of Germany, Jews faced persecution, humiliation, and violence. Pogroms swept through their communities like storms, and laws pushed them to the margins of society. But in their suffering, a seed began to grow. The dream of return, the hope of Zion, the ancient longing whispered in every Passover. Next year in Jerusalem. And they came, not in armies, but in families. Not with swords, but with prayers. They brought their Torahs, their books, their language. They came by foot, by cart, by ship, crossing deserts and seas to reach the land of their ancestors. They did not limit themselves to the narrow confines of the old city. No, they ventured beyond the walls, establishing new neighborhoods such as Mishkanot Sha'ananim, where homes were built with stone and faith. By 1882, the Jewish population in Jerusalem had grown to approximately 25,000, a remarkable number for a city that had been all but forgotten a century earlier. Synagogues were established, schools opened, and life returned to streets that had long echoed only with the wind. The sound of Hebrew, the language of prophets and kings, was heard once more in daily conversation, no longer confined to prayer alone. The Jewish quarter began to overflow, and new communities were born, each a testament to the will of a people who had waited generations for this moment. But as the Jewish presence grew, so too did tensions, for the land was not empty. Arab Muslims and Christians had lived in Palestine for centuries, and while Jerusalem was holy to all, it was also home. The influx of European Jews, with their unfamiliar languages and customs, brought unease. The newcomers built institutions, bought land, and established a presence that, though legal and often peaceful, stirred fear and resentment. The Ottoman authorities watched with wary eyes, trying to maintain order while balancing the competing interests of local communities and foreign powers. The tension was not yet violent, but the ground trembled with the weight of competing histories and hopes. And so, by the dawn of the 20th century, Jerusalem was no longer the sleepy, crumbling city of 100 years prior. It was alive, complex, and fragile. Jews now made up nearly two-thirds of the population, and the city had become a microcosm of a coming storm. The layers of time lay thick upon her: Roman stone, Crusader arches, Islamic calligraphy, Jewish prayer, and above all, the ever-present sense that this city was not merely a place but a purpose. For those who lived there, every sunrise over the Mount of Olives, every shadow cast by the walls, every footstep upon the cobblestones carried the weight of millennia. It is impossible to walk through Jerusalem and not feel it, that invisible current that ties heaven and earth, past and future, man and God. For all her troubles, Jerusalem remained the heart of prophecy, the dream of generations, the place where history is not just remembered, but lived. And though the world was changing, and though darkness loomed on the horizon, Jerusalem endured, her stones remembered, her people prayed. And in every whispered petition, in every candle lit, in every tear shed at the wall or kneeling at the tomb, there echoed the eternal hope that one day peace would reign within her gates, and the voice of the Lord would be heard once more upon her hills. In the year of our Lord 1917, amidst the great storms of World War I, a pivotal moment unfolded in the ancient city of Jerusalem, a city sacred to Jews, Christians, and Muslims alike. As if written by the hand of Providence, the British forces under General Edmund Allenby marched into Jerusalem, wresting it from centuries of Ottoman rule. The world watched in awe and wonder, for Jerusalem, so long closed to the world, had opened her gates to a new chapter of history. Yet, the joy of liberation was soon overshadowed by the heavy burdens of human ambition and conflicting promises. For the British, now stewards of the Holy Land under the Mandate for Palestine, authorized by the League of Nations, the land was both a divine trust and a political quagmire. In 1917, the same year they took Jerusalem, Britain made two solemn yet contradictory promises. One was the Balfour Declaration, a pledge to support the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. This was a beacon of hope for the Jewish people, scattered across the earth like stars in the heavens, many of whom had suffered exile, persecution, and the aching longing to return to Zion, as prophesied in Psalm 137:5. If I forget you, O Jerusalem, let my right hand forget its skill. But Britain also promised the Arab peoples autonomy and independence, should they rise against the Ottoman Empire. And rise they did, forming an alliance with the British against their common foe. Yet what was promised in trust soon became the seed of discord. Two peoples, each with ancient roots in the land, each holding fast to divine inheritance, began to see one another not as brothers under the same sky, but as rivals for the same promise. The land, sacred and bountiful, became a crucible of competing destinies. As the decades passed, tension grew like a storm cloud over the hills of Judea. In 1947, after years of violence, displacement, and failed negotiations, the United Nations offered a plan to divide the land into two states, one for the Jewish people, one for the Arab people. Jerusalem, holy to all, was to be placed under international administration, a city without a nation, belonging to God and not to men. But human hearts are not easily bound by paper and ink. The plan was accepted by the Jewish leadership, but rejected by the Arab nations, and what might have been peace became instead the trumpet call of war. In 1948, Israel declared independence. It was a moment of biblical magnitude. After nearly 2 millennia, the Jewish people had a nation once more. Many saw it as the fulfillment of Isaiah 66:8. Can a country be born in a day, or a nation be brought forth in a moment? Yet, even as the shofar sounded and prayers ascended to heaven, war descended upon the land. The Arab-Israeli war erupted with fury, and Jerusalem, beautiful, beloved, and broken, was split in twain. West Jerusalem came under Israeli control, while East Jerusalem, including the sacred Temple Mount, fell under Jordanian rule. The streets of the holy city, once walked by prophets and pilgrims, now echoed with the sounds of gunfire and grief. Families were torn apart, homes abandoned, holy places desecrated. The Western Wall, holiest site in Judaism, was rendered unreachable to the Jewish faithful. Christian and Muslim sites, too, bore the scars of division. And still, the people prayed. They prayed for peace, for justice, for the day when swords would be beaten into plowshares, as foretold in Isaiah 2:4. But the decades that followed brought not peace, but a cycle of conflict and uneasy truces. The Six-Day War in 1967 would see Israel take full control of Jerusalem, unifying the city under its authority. For the Jewish people, it was a miracle, the return to Zion foretold in countless psalms and prophecies. Yet for the Palestinians, it was the beginning of occupation, exile, and loss. The Temple Mount, Al-Aqsa Mosque, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, all became symbols of pain, hope, and contested sovereignty. As the 20th century gave way to the 21st, Jerusalem remained a cup of trembling, just as the prophet Zechariah warned in Zechariah 12:2. The peace process ebbed and flowed like the tides. Yet the heart of the conflict, Jerusalem, remained unresolved. For how can one city belong to all and yet to none? How can earthly rulers divide what heaven has declared indivisible? The answers lie not in the halls of diplomacy, but in the hearts of men, in their willingness to forgive, to see the image of God in their neighbor, to choose peace over pride. In my own reflection, I cannot help but feel the weight of this city's suffering and its sanctity. I once stood by the Western Wall, watching people of every nation tuck prayers into the ancient stones. Some wept, some sang, all believed. It struck me then that this place, Jerusalem, is not just a city. It is a mirror, revealing the soul of humanity, our yearning for God, our longing for home, our struggle between love and fear. And so Jerusalem endures, not only as a geographical center, but as a spiritual crucible where heaven and earth meet. It is a city that breaks hearts and mends them, that divides and unites, that reminds us of our deepest wounds and highest hopes. From the hills of Zion to the Mount of Olives, her stones cry out for peace. Her people, weary yet unyielding, continue to dream. And God, who neither slumbers nor sleeps, watches over her still, as the psalmist wrote in Psalm 121:4. The story of Jerusalem in the 20th century is not merely history. It is prophecy unfolding. It is humanity revealed. It is the voice of eternity echoing in the chambers of time. And so, as the golden sun dips below the hills that cradle Jerusalem, casting long shadows over walls that have seen the rise and fall of empires, we find ourselves standing not just at the end of a story, but at the edge of something eternal. A city built not only of stone, but of faith, of fire, of longing. A city that has never truly belonged to any one people, because it has always belonged to all of us, and yet still to none. It is a place that refuses to be forgotten. A city that lives in the heart of humanity like a question we cannot answer, like a prayer we keep repeating, even when the world grows silent. Jerusalem is not simply a location on a map. It is a mystery carved into the soul of civilization. It has been craved by kings, claimed by prophets, and consecrated by blood. It has been split by sword, sealed in scripture, and sung about in psalms. It has stood through the cracking bones of Babylon, the fiery collapse of Rome, the hooves of crusaders, and the minarets of caliphs. It has been kissed by saints and cursed by tyrants, and still, it breathes. The stories that echo in its alleyways are more than just history. They are humanity's reflections, its triumphs and failures written in ancient dust. For every stone is a storyteller, every gate a witness, every scar on the city's walls a chapter in a divine saga that has not yet reached its end. And maybe it never will. Maybe Jerusalem is eternal, not because of what it is, but because of what it means. To fight for it is to fight for meaning itself. To lose it is to question destiny. And to walk its streets is to feel the tremble of centuries beneath your feet. This city is sacred, not because of architecture or politics, but because of belief. Because 3 billion people across 3 great faiths still look to her as a bridge to the divine. Jews yearn for her as the site of their ancient temple. Christians revere her as the place of crucifixion and resurrection, and Muslims cherish her as the destination of a miraculous night journey. Jerusalem is the shared heartbeat of religions that have often clashed, yet somehow still orbit the same spiritual sun. But what does that mean for us today, in a world still fractured by difference? Maybe Jerusalem reminds us of how deeply our hopes can run, of how powerful belief can be, and of how fragile peace truly is. For thousands of years, men have tried to own her, to rewrite her story with their swords, their treaties, their declarations. Yet the city resists definition. She changes, and yet stays the same. She breaks, and still endures. She is the beginning of a covenant and the battlefield of betrayal, the city of God and the city of man. We've journeyed through 5 millennia together in this video, From humble spring to sacred stronghold, from David's harp to Caesar's heel, from Crusader cross to Ottoman crescent, from imperial ambition to modern-day turmoil. And after all that, Jerusalem remains a paradox, holy yet wounded, desired yet divided, ancient yet alive. If this story moved you, then you're already part of the legacy. Because to care about Jerusalem is to care about something much bigger than ourselves. It is to open your heart to the past while daring to believe in the future. It is to stare into the soul of civilization and ask, what do we worship, and why do we fight for it? So if you felt the weight of this history, if you walked with us through time and tears, then let this not be the end. Let it be the beginning of your own quest for understanding. Hit that like button to show the algorithm what stories really matter. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because we're not done. We have more mysteries to unravel, more truths to seek, more cities and civilizations to resurrect in vivid detail. History isn't just about the past. It's a key to the present and a map to the future. And if you believe, like we do, that knowledge is sacred, that storytelling can heal wounds older than nations, and that by understanding where we come from, we can better shape where we go, then join us. Share this video with someone who needs to remember that behind every headline is a history, behind every border is a belief, and behind every conflict, there is a human soul, one that dreams, one that remembers. In the end, Jerusalem is not merely a place, it is a mirror. A flame, a challenge. Will we learn from its centuries of struggle? Will we dare to hope for something better? Will we be the generation that turns from the sword to the scroll, from destruction to dialogue, from fear to faith? The city waits. Watching, listening, praying. We hope you do too. Thank you for watching. Thank you for believing. And until next time, peace be upon you. Shalom alaikum, assalamu alaikum. Now go forth and let history speak.